All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back and we're troubleshooting the RX8 to finish our install. Let's go. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Make It and Break It. My name's Andrew, and today we're going to try and finish up our engine install on the Mazda RX8. I say finish up because the engine's installed and it runs when the car drives, and it actually shifts now, which is nice. But one thing that we're struggling with right now is we have a bunch of check engine lights and codes showing up, and they're not super consistent right now. So what I've done is I've gone through and cleaned a couple of the connectors for some of the things that were possibly going wrong here, and I'll explain that in a second as I do my little walk around. But first I've cleared the codes, and I'm gonna go flip this thing on, turn it on, get it to heat up and warm up, and then do a little inspection around, make sure we're not missing anything else. Just because it's not flipping a code doesn't mean that there's not something wrong. So we're gonna go take another inspection around the car now it's had a chance to heat up and cool down a few times and settle in, and see if we've got something else going on. And then we'll read the codes and we'll start troubleshooting from there. So here we go. Alright, so we did our heat up and a lot of the codes are gone. So let's go through some of the codes that were there. I'll talk you through the problems and actually show you some of the locations because some of these things are not evidently obvious where they are. Here we go now. So I use Blue Driver, is kind of like my OBD reader of choice. It's a little Bluetooth module. You hook it up to your phone, and you can actually get scans from pretty much every module on the car, and you don't have to go spend like $3,000 on a scan tool by Snap-on or something like that. So this was about a week ago, I think. This is the report. So if you go through here, there's a bunch of cool features, but it'll save basically every scan you do. So I'm gonna go back to report a week ago, actually, pretty much exactly, on our 2004 Mazda. And we had powertrain anyway. There's a random code that I haven't seen here yet. But we had 5 confirmed and or pending codes. Some of these pending ones ended up being confirmed later, or they confirm as a different style of code, and I'll tell you about those in a bit. First one, and this one's most concerning. If you see a code like this, definitely figure it out soon. This is not one of those codes that you can just wander around on. It's not like an O2 sensor code or anything like that where the circuits are wrong or anything like that. This is a bad code. This one's P0328. So if you're not good at codes, what that means is the circuit on your knock sensor 1. So if you have more than one knock sensor, it'll be bank 1. In this case, this engine only has one knock sensor. Is high. And I think there's a similar one for the voltage is low. What it essentially says is there's something wrong with the circuit with your knock sensor. So knock sensor is kind of an annoying spot in the area. I'm going to show you where it is on the engine that's installed, and I'll go walk over to our spare engine and I'll show you what's going on. So the knock sensor over here is right down, way down in here. You're never going to see it through all the wires. But it's way down in here, and it's above your spark plugs for your rear rotor. So let's go take a look at what it looks like on our engine that's not installed. So, if you've been watching this channel, then you might recognize this. This is your actual rotary. This is your 2-rotor 13B MSP or whatever it is, multi-side port, I think is what it stands for. This is where installed in the car. You can see the clutch over here, backside, front side, and then this is missing like the whole upper intake manifold area. Anyway, we go down and look at this thing. This would be your front rotor here. See where all the wires and leads lead down from. And this is your rear rotor. So it'll be, if you're looking at it, it's behind where your oil feed line comes down. And right back in here is a little wart type thing. This is your knock sensor. So this is your little connection. It'll come up here and it'll separate from this main harness that kind of runs down along this way. Knock harnesses are very important things on your engine. What they do is they basically detect vibrations in your engine when your fuel is igniting before it should. That's what's called knock. And it's really bad. It creates weird pressure waves that the engine's not designed for. In a normal engine with pistons, it can cause detonation, which will shatter valves or put holes in pistons and things like that. In this engine, it can do lots of weird things. Basically, everything that if something's knocking, it's probably bad. It will probably blow up the apex seals in this engine and may damage your rotors further, and you're basically going to junk at least half of your engine if you have a consistent level of knock somewhere and you're not sensing it. So what a knock sensor does, it senses that explosion, that early explosion, as a vibration through the engine outside of this normal parameter, and it sends that to the computer, and the computer will dial back all of your fuel and timing and everything else, so that... Hello, Joe. Want to learn about rotaries today, bub? That sound fun? Yeah. And that'll dial back all of your ignition and fuel and everything, so that you're running safe and you're out of the knock zone. And it'll basically put your car in limp mode, usually. So we're walking through P0328. If we're walking through it, there's only so many things that can go wrong with a knock sensor. So most of the troubleshooting involves this connection, this top connection right here to the main harness. We can zoom in a little bit. That connection right there. And so what you want to do is you want to find this, and I was able to snake, let's get it focused on there. I was able to snake my hand in and with a little bit of a plier pull the connection off. You want to check the connections pieces in here and on the harness section to validate that everything is in good condition, not pulling out, that sort of thing. Stop with that. I want you to focus on that there. And basically then, if everything looks like it's in good condition, you have two options. One is you can check the voltage. So the voltage on the harness side, you check both terminals to ground. If the voltage is turned up fine, then you don't have a short and it's a problem with your sensor. There's only so many things that can go wrong here. So then you just got to pull this bolt if the sensor is bad. And you can pull that bolt, pull the sensor out, put a new one in, or inspect the sensor. There's, if you have the factory service manual, there's inspection stuff for it. But being electrical, the first thing you should do before you start replacing stuff is check all of your circuits, because I find that the circuits on pretty much most cars, especially older cars like this and my Chrysler, we found that circuits and connections are usually the problem. So the first thing you do in troubleshooting this is actually pull this connection, inspect it, clean it, and put it back together and see if it works again. If you're not revving the engine too much, knock is not really a worry, especially on a stock engine. If you're running a very modified engine, that may or may not be the case. But on a stock engine, knock's pretty much only a concern as you go up in the rev range and you start getting heat and stuff built into the engine. That's kind of what you do to troubleshoot that code. And the next code that actually has something we can go look at easily, and I'll talk you through the one that we're going to struggle with here, is P0443. Again, I'll translate that into English, and that's your evap system purge control valve solenoid circuit. So luckily this is not like the solenoids we started this channel on, which were way on the back of the upper intake manifold. This is actually a solenoid that's pretty much accessible from the front. So if you're looking at the front of your engine here installed, you've got, this is your intake track right to your upper intake manifold, and those solenoids that are a real pain that you want to replace at all costs are back over here behind this section here. Well, this evap control solenoid is actually this connection right here. So it just connects into this front part of your upper intake manifold. It's pretty easy to get to. You just have to pop a couple connections here, maybe move this if you really want to, and you can get to it and do a lot of your troubleshooting diagnostic. Like pretty much everything else, this is a circuit problem. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you're troubleshooting this is pull this connection and clean it and inspect it. Make sure everything looks good. And then once you clean it, inspect it, spray it with a little QD cleaner, electrical cleaner. So you spray it with that, let it dry out, maybe blow it with some air if you've got an air gun or an air compressor, and then put it back together and see if it works. Because there's really not a whole lot to troubleshoot. If your circuit looks good and you do your circuit checks, then what you're really stuck with is it's either the connection is loose or you actually have to replace it. So I'll show you what it looks like, just in case you're curious. So this is the old upper intake manifold. It was actually on this engine when we got it, and we just kind of tossed it because we don't need it anymore. So this is where your throttle body bolts in, and this runs into the top of your actual lower intake manifold, the metal piece over there. And the solenoid you're worried about is this beauty right here. So this is obviously a different design than the old one, and it really just pops out. There's a couple O-ring connections here, and then you have your, this is your silencer thing here. And this is your electrical connection. This is like your standard 2-pin connection. Be like pretty similar to pretty much everything you've seen elsewhere around this car. And yeah, the replacement is not expensive, but it's not cheap either. I think they're run about 90 bucks, so you definitely want to do your troubleshooting with the connections first before you go replacing it. Because even though it's easy to replace, if you don't have to spend 100 bucks, then don't. Especially on a car like this where you're going to end up spending a lot of money fixing it anyway. The third problem, which is something we can go look at and kind of based on the heat up cycle I just saw may or may not be a problem with us, is P0138. Again, translating to English, that's your O2 sensor circuit voltage is high, and this is your second O2 sensor. So circuit 1, bank 2, I think, or bank 1, circuit sensor 2. Essentially, most cars, for this car anyway, and I think a lot of cars, have two O2 sensors. The first one is pretty much right off the exhaust, and that's this one that you see on the exhaust manifold. It sits right here, comes out, goes up to the rest of your wiring harness, and ta-da. Right? And the second one is actually on your mid pipe. Let's go see if we can't take a look at it. Alright, so we're underneath the car here, and you can see this is the back of the exhaust manifold, running out to your mid pipe and out back your exhaust down that way. And that sensor right there is the second O2 sensor. So the second O2 sensor is used to basically measure the efficiency of your car, and I believe it measures the efficiency of your catalytic converter. So what it does is it takes the O2 reading and compares it to the one that was off of the exhaust, and the computer compares it in tables and says, okay, the oxygen levels are good, catalytic converter's working, everything's working fine, or oh, something's off, and we should go fix that. So this thing actually connects up right here. See if I can do this without burning the crap out of my hands. That's bright. So the wire actually goes and hooks up right here into the harness that runs over top of your transmission. So this harness runs all the way from the main engine bay down along the top of your transmission here. See that black harness right there? And then you actually play with the connection right up in here. So there's a couple different connections in there. There's the white ones and the black ones. So there's a white connection, a set of white connections that pair together. And those ones are actually not too bad to try and figure out. So those white connections are marked. Pretty much every one of them that I've seen has a little pink marking that matches the side of the white connection that you're supposed to connect, and the other non-marked one goes together. The black ones are not nearly as consistently marked, and you can't always, in fact, in this one, the wires on both sides of both of these connections are just black. There's no colors to either of these wired side connections. So it is entirely possible to screw them up, although I think the black one should be ground and the white one should lead to the connections, to whatever sensors they're leading to. One of them leads in here, I do believe. But there's no guarantee of that, so keep that in mind. But essentially, this is still a circuit problem, so the same troubleshooting applies. You take this connection apart, clean it, and I don't know if we can get the focus a little better. Take this connection apart. In this case, I have to cut a zip tie in order, because I have to zip tie it in because this thing is broken. And clean it up and inspect for pins and damage and stuff. Put it back together and try it out again and see if she decides she wants to work on you. And then really you can check your continuity between your two pieces here, and you do that by checking, if you look at the service manual, you check one of the pins to your body ground, you check the other pin to your body ground, and if the voltages turn out okay, you're essentially, you have nothing wrong in your harness. Otherwise, it's just a sensor replacement at that point. Although you do want to do all of your continuity checks, because coming down here and taking these sensors off, especially with these bolts as corroded as they can be, you can see some of that right there. These bolts, as corroded as they are, you really don't want to mess with them too much, because you can strip them and then you lose your protection for your O2 sensors and various things like that. So you want to keep this as pristine as possible. So I actually didn't mess with this connection because I was not sure if this was actually a problem or not yet. So I left it the same and messed with some of the other connections before our heat up. And yeah. All right, while we're down here, I wanted to show you guys something I noticed prior to starting to shoot this video. If I can get a good view on it here. So this is the bottom of the engine, right? This is your oil pan. That's your oil drain plug there. If you change your oil, that's where it is. And you see around the oil drain plug, this is not unusual. There's a little bit of oil staining and spotting. Just happens. You can clean it up and it'll stay that way for a while. What is unusual though is the oil staining along the entire front of this oil pan. Notice at the back what a dry oil pan looks like. You see that? You can see kind of dust and bars and stuff like that. Front, you see that dark oil staining all the way around. And it actually runs all the way around over here up in the back. And that's not ideal. When I came down here earlier, there was actually little bits, or little like droplets of oil on the heads of each one of these bolts. And that's a bad sign. That means something's leaking somewhere and getting oil on these bolts. And that could be the actual oil pan itself could be leaking all the way around the front. You can see the little bend marks right there on the oil pan lip there. And I did run that into the subframe a couple times trying to install it with my bad pulley setup, so that could have put some stress on the silicone of this oil pan and caused there to be a slow seeping leak, which is not ideal. But this is something we're gonna have to keep an eye on. I was looking around. Part of the reason I was under the car when it was heating up is I was looking around for a leak. I didn't see anything obvious, which is annoying. But we'll have to keep our eye on this. If we start losing oil at absurd levels, then we'll probably have to end up replacing this oil pan. All right, so the final code that we're dealing with here on our fancy dancy thing is one that can be a doozy, especially since we just replaced a bunch of components. This is P0301. So that's, in English terms, that's cylinder 1 misfire. So on a rotary, that means front rotor misfire, because the rotaries don't have the same sort of setup. So they essentially assume that they're a 2-piston or a 2-cylinder engine when you're doing that. If you're doing a 13B style, if you're doing a 20B triple rotor, I'm not sure if those come standard with an ECU that can do this sort of stuff, but if it did, you'd have a piston 1, 2, 3 or cylinder 1, 2, 3 being your front, mid, and rear rotors. So in this case, we have a front rotor misfire detected. This can be a whole lot of things. So it can be anything from spark plugs to spark plug wires to coil packs, to your harness leading to the coil packs, to your fuel system could be sort of weird and messed up and not getting fuel in at the right ways, to it could actually be something wrong with the swap, and I think we're going to try that first. So one of the things that we didn't do, and we probably should have once we finished the swap, was reset the computer parameters. So there's a couple different memories on the Mazda RX-8. There's an NVRAM, which is a non-volatile random access memory. It's basically where your I think it's where your sensor settings and things like that are stored. And then there is a CAM, which is your I forget. Hold on. This is why Google was invented. KAM is keep alive memory. So NVRAM stores things like sensor profiles, things like your eccentric shaft sensor. Your ESS is your eccentric shaft sensor. It's a crank position sensor is typically what the code will read if there's a problem, and I've seen those on and off with this thing right now. It's not currently on any saved readout, but things like those sensors, and apparently your misfire, detection of misfire, can be affected if you don't adjust your NVRAM when you change your eccentric shaft profile. So our new engine will be pretty close, but not exactly identical with its new eccentric shaft timing to everything else. And so what we should have done when we replaced the engine is to change and get rid of the NVRAM before going and trying to do all the rest of this stuff. So that might have been some of the reason that we have other issues like knock sensors and everything else, because the computer thinks that the crank is in a slightly different position than it is, and so we're getting weird results. So that's what we're going to do first, and it also follows my rules for troubleshooting, which is do the minimal amount of work possible, work into the harder stuff. Troubleshooting is a little bit different than accomplishing projects, where accomplishing the hard stuff first is not necessarily better. Troubleshooting, you're often more benefited by using the minimum amount of effort to get to each next step. So the first thing we can do here is actually just reset the NVRAM, and I'll show you what you do for that. I just explained this whole thing and the camera wasn't on. So we're in our driver's seat here, and this is where you clear your NVRAM. And the NVRAM clearing procedure is actually very simple. Although I'll probably screw it up once or twice. So when you're clearing your NVRAM on your Mazda RX-8, you're going to make 2 steps in rapid succession. This is for 2004 to 2008 model years. 2009 and up, I believe, is different, but it accomplishes pretty much the same thing. The steps are done in pretty rapid succession, but we're going to explain it here a little bit slowly. So the first thing you do is take your key, put it in your ignition, and turn it on. But not turn the car on. You just want to turn the ignition into the on position. So the second thing you need to do is pump the brake pedal 20 times within 8 seconds of turning the ignition on. This is kind of like a mini game, but a lot less fun. So you have to do this really quick, obviously. So if you have the right model year or the right ECU type, what'll actually happen if you do it correctly, the oil pressure gauge will sweep and tell you if it was completed or not. If you don't have the right VIN model year or something like that, then actually you won't get any indication as to if you were complete or not in doing it. So we're gonna go try that out and then go take it for a quick test drive and see if we fix it, maybe. Nice. If you notice there, our oil pressure gauge went like this and swept. So that means we have a computer or the VIN code that sweeps and tells us we are complete. And we can put the wheels on this thing and give it a test drive. See if the see if our misfire check engine code goes away. Alright, I kind of lied. We're not going to go for a drive. One, because I don't want to put the front wheels back on right now, and two, there's no car. I don't want to have to shuttle things back and forth when I still kind of want to work on some stuff on this car here. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we have it still up on the jack stands. We're going to turn it on, and what we're looking for is a flashing check engine light over here. Hold on, I forgot no BT2 scanner. Never mind, the blue driver one is installed. So far this thing has actually shown misfires pretty much immediately upon starting up. That check engine light will blink, and so a blinking check engine light means there's an active misfire. If you get a misfire check engine code and it's solid, that means it's usually the P0300, which is random misfire, and it's not a great thing. So what we're gonna do here is turn it on while we're sitting up here and see if everything wants to play nice. That clutch is definitely annoying, but previous to this, we had typically seen flashing check engine light here, where during startup, and that would actually be from a misfire. So maybe we have actually fixed this. Let's pull up our scanner here. Just see if we can't get this thing to. Let's pull up our scanner, and we're gonna scan all systems. Oh, hold on. All right. So what we would normally see when we were doing this, we do a little rev or run it up a little bit higher. And we normally see a check engine light over here flashing, and that is not happening right now. Currently it's still showing a pending code, a pending P0301. I don't know if you guys can see that. Currently the code is still showing pending, but it doesn't look like we're actually getting a code here. So I think we might actually go take this for a drive and validate that everything's working. I also want to put some more gas in here and get some premix going, so we'll talk about that a little bit here too. So let's go do that. So I want to talk quickly about premixing and why it's important on rotaries as well as your like two-stroke motorcycles and stuff like that. So premixing basically adds a lubricating oil to the gas, which does a couple things. On the rotary like this, it actually helps mitigate some of the oiling issues that happen in the Renesas RX8s. So these engines came with very low oiling, the 2004 to 2008 models. And then the 2009 models, they also added an extra port. So how a Renesys normally works is you're spinning, everything's on, and there's a pump on this back side over here that registers and pumps oil through a bunch of lines and into these little oil squirters. So this is the rear oil squirters, and you can see they're pointed out. So this is pumping oil straight into the combustion chamber. So what that does is it lubricates the seals, and everything needs to be lubricated on the inside in order for everything to rotate well. Unfortunately, what this does, you see these are pointed towards the outside. So what happens on early model RX8s like this is that the outside of the apex seals, here, and the side seals and all that sort of stuff gets lubricated pretty well, and the middle doesn't really get lubricated all that well. And so when we crack this one open, and when you crack most Renesys engines open, you see a wear spot in the middle where the lubrication wasn't sufficient, and the apex seal scratches the finish on the rotor housing. The way to fix this is to, one, add an extra port. So the 2009 and up Renesys engines actually added an extra oil injection port there, and or two, put lubrication in your fuel, because your fuel goes all over the combustion chamber, and that will actually lubricate very well. In fact, a lot of people who drive these in high performance applications, or 13Bs from the RX-7, actually get rid of the oil metering pump altogether, because it ends up building up carbon in your combustion chamber. So that's what we're going to do on this new engine to try and get it to last as long as possible. So what we have here is some Pettit Racing ProTech R. It's essentially two-stroke oil is what this stuff is. You can use pretty much any two-stroke oil. Royal Purple makes some. Idemitsu makes some that's specially formulated for rotaries. But basically any good ISO and JASO, something like that. Two-stroke oil will work. Don't use the marine stuff. That's really bad for your car's cats. Any good two-stroke oil or specifically designed rotary synthetic lubricant will work. And then you just add it when you're adding in fuel. So the ratios are big black magic. Everyone's got their own favorite ratio. For me and the way I drive this car, I end up driving it pretty hard when I'm driving it. So I'm going to end up running a little bit high on this stuff for a daily driver, because it'll also see some track days, and I don't want to necessarily have to deal with fuel on track days too much different than I do on a regular race day. So I'm going to end up adding like half an ounce for each gallon of fuel. It'll end up being about 8 ounces of fill up when we're all said and done. Some people add less, some people add more. With our oil injection system, we don't have to add a ton, so we're going to end up being about 8 ounces per fill up. Top tip though, adding two-stroke oil to your fuel will put more oils and stuff in the exhausts, which will eat your cat earlier. So if you didn't want to get rid of the cat, maybe go lighter on the oils. It also might make it a little bit harder to pass emissions, but that may or may not be a concern for you guys. That's just a little primer about premixing. There's a lot more to it if you want to get into it, and there's some black science and a lot of personal opinion out there. But just as a primer, why do you premix? It's basically to lubricate everything. So we'll get some premix in here and maybe get this out today. Done enough troubleshooting, and it's running late tonight, so I gotta get this video out. So with that small primer on premixing done, I think we're gonna call it here for tonight. It's getting a little bit late. I need to get a video prepped and out for you guys, and I still want to do a couple more things before I get this thing on the road. So the next episode probably will be test driving this, making sure everything works on the road again, and we'll get some video of it this time, not like last time where the video got lost somehow. And then we'll get started making this thing into a real race car. So that'll be as we take this thing forward. Hopefully you guys found kind of the troubleshooting and tips and tricks interesting. I find that electrical connections are the bane of my existence, and most of what's wrong with most of my cars is just bad electrical connections and unclean electrical connections, all that stuff out there. So if I'm having the problems, someone else is also having the problems, so I figured I'd let you guys in on that. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Thanks for watching, guys. My name's Andrew. This is another Make It Break It YouTube episode on our Project Doritos Locos RX8. If you like this video, definitely hit like, comment down below if you have questions, comments, concerns, you want me to explain more about something or else, or just want to tell me I did something wrong or pointed out the wrong sensor, that'd be fine with me. If you like what we're doing on this channel, we got race cars, motorcycle builds, some technology and 3D printing stuff. If any of that stuff sounds interesting, check it out. Subscribe, hit the like button or the bell button so you get notified when we put out a new video. So thanks for watching again, guys. My name's Andrew, and catch y'all later.